She spent her whole life inside a grand Victorian house, yet almost no one was meant to remember her name. Born poor, trained young, and sent through the back door, a maidservant learned to wake before comfort, clean what others never saw, carry secrets she could never speak, and grow old in a world that needed her hands more than her life. This is not a story of castles, romance, or fine manners, but of the quiet women who kept that world standing while disappearing inside it. Tonight we step behind the polished rooms and follow one Victorian maidservant from birth to death. So, before you settle in, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if these slow human stories from history are something you truly enjoy. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It always makes this little journey feel less lonely, knowing people are listening from different corners of the world. Now, let the room become calm. Maybe turn on a fan, or let the night stay quiet around you, and let's step behind the servant's door together tonight. If you had seen me as a little girl, I would not have looked special. I was only a poor child in a small Victorian house, standing beside a washtub that came up too high for me. My dress was grey, thin at the elbows, the room was cramped, the floor was cold, the window let in a weak light that made everything look tired. I remember holding the wooden rim of the tub with both hands, not because I was strong enough to do much, but because I already knew a child in our house should look ready to help. My mother did not set me to work because she wanted to be hard. She did it because there was no one else. There was water to fetch, fire to light, washing to rinse, younger children to watch, and food to stretch until the next coin came in. When she bent over the tub, I stood close and copied her. I learned how to rub cloth, how to wring a small rag, how to keep a baby quiet, and how to move out of the way when grown people were too tired to speak kindly. In a poor house, work did not wait for age. It found the nearest pair of hands. At first I thought helping was only part of being good. If I carried a little water without spilling it, my mother looked relieved. If I kept quiet while she counted money, the room felt safer. If I watched my younger brother while she worked, I felt older than I was. That was how childhood changed for me. It did not end in one hard moment. It became smaller each day, as if every little task took away a corner of it. The danger was not obvious then. No one saw a little girl beside a washtub and called it dangerous. It looked ordinary. It looked like family life, but it taught me early that my time was not really mine. It taught me that tired adults needed silence more than questions. It taught me that being useful could matter more than being rested and happy. Those lessons stayed in the body long after the work was done. For a society that liked to speak about proper young ladies, it was strangely comfortable letting poor girls begin life with cold water, sore fingers, and no real childhood. No one came to ask whether I should be learning letters instead of scrubbing clothes. No one wondered whether my back ached. A girl like me was expected to grow into work the way a plant grows toward light, except there was not much light in our room, and the work was much easier to find. My hands changed before my thoughts did. The skin around my fingers grew red from water. My wrists felt weak after carrying pails. My knees learned the feel of hard floorboards. Sometimes I wanted to sit still and do nothing, but that was a wish I knew not to say aloud. My mother was tired too. Her shoulders had a permanent bend in them. Her hands looked rough even when they were clean. If I complained, I was not only speaking about my own tiredness, I was adding one more trouble to hers. That was one of the quiet cruelties of poverty. It made love real, but it also made love exhausted. My mother cared for me, but her care did not always look gentle. Sometimes it looked like teaching me how to scrub properly. Sometimes it looked like telling me to stop dreaming over a shop window. Sometimes it looked like pushing a needle into my hand so I could learn small repairs, because a girl who could sew might one day be accepted in a better house. A child now may think chores are unfair, But I did not have a neat little corner of the day where childhood ended and work began. Everything mixed together. I could be holding a baby one moment, carrying water the next, and standing beside washing before my arms had stopped aching. Even play, when it came, was short and watched by need. I learned to enjoy small things quickly because someone could call my name at any time. I remember one morning when nothing remarkable happened. The tub was full of grey water. My mother was rubbing a cloth. I stood beside her, sleepy, trying to look awake. My dress hung loose at one shoulder. My fingers rested on the tub, and I kept blinking because the room felt too early for my eyes. I wanted to lean against my mother, but she was working too hard for that. So I stood there, quiet, pretending I was stronger than I was. I still think of that little girl, because she was not being trained for a dream. She was being trained to disappear neatly into other people's needs. She did not know the word maidservant in any full way. She did not know about bells on walls, back stairs, sculleries, housekeepers, or the feeling of entering a grand house through the wrong door. But the first lessons were already there. Keep your hands busy. Do not ask too much. Notice what needs doing. Be grateful for little things. Be quiet when tired people are near. Many poor Victorian girls learned the same lesson before they ever left home. We were not always forced with loud words. Often we were guided by hunger, rent, coal, and the simple fear of being useless. A family did not need to say that a daughter would go into service. The house itself seemed to say it. The empty cupboard said it. The worn shoes said it. The tired mother said it without meaning to. Only later did I understand that a servant was made long before she reached a master's house. She was made in small rooms beside cold tubs, with a baby on her hip and soap drying her fingers. She was made by mornings that started too early and evenings that ended with more work left for tomorrow. By the time I was old enough to leave, I had already learned the shape of obedience. I was born in a house where work arrived before dreams had any room to grow. As I grew older, that poverty began to point me toward another door, one that did not open for play, rest, or choice. When my mother started preparing me for service, I began to understand that helping at home had only been practice for belonging somewhere else, even less. By the time I grew taller, nobody in our house needed to explain where a poor girl's life was going. It was already there in the way my mother looked at my hands, my sewing, my manners, and the way I carried a pail without spilling. I was no longer only the small child beside the wash tub. I was becoming a girl who could be sent out, hired, corrected, and paid a little money. That was how the future entered our house, not as a question, but as another duty waiting near the door. My mother began preparing me in small ways. She showed me how to mend a hem neatly, because a torn dress made a poor girl look careless. She made me practice folding cloth, setting things straight, sweeping corners, and keeping my voice low. She reminded me not to stare, not to answer back, and not to cry where anyone important could see. These were not lessons for comfort. They were lessons for survival in someone else's house. I did not hate her for it. She was trying to give me what she could. We had no money for long schooling. We had no room where I could sit and decide what kind of woman I wished to become. That was the nearest thing to opportunity we could afford. My mother knew this without making a speech of it. She had seen other girls leave before me, some returning thinner, some proud for a week, some silent about what had happened in the houses where they worked. Her lessons came from watching, worrying, and having no better answer for a daughter born with so little to bargain with in life at all, yet. The hard part was that everyone made it sound natural. Girls like me went into service. That was just how people spoke of it. A son might be sent to a trade, a yard, a workshop, or a factory. A daughter might be sent to scrub, wash, carry, and obey inside a better house. There was no great announcement. The decision grew from unpaid rent, thin meals, worn boots, and my mother's tired face. By the time anyone said it aloud, it had already been true for a long while. For a world so fond of calling poor girls respectable when they were quiet, it offered us few respectable choices that did not begin with someone else's flaw. I learned that keeping my head down could be praised as good character. I learned that silence could be called modesty, even when it was really fear. I learned that neat stitches, clean hands, and a lowered voice could matter more than what I wanted. Wanting too much could make a poor girl look ungrateful. The danger was not only that I would work hard. I already knew hard work. The danger was that I was being taught to shrink before I had finished growing. Sewing could help me earn a place, but it also taught me to fix damage quietly. Sweeping could make a room clean. Holding my tongue could keep me employed, but it could also make me disappear inside my own life. My body understood this before my mind did. I stood straighter when my mother checked my collar. I held my hands still when she looked at my nails. I swallowed words before they reached my mouth. Too bright and I might look foolish. Too sad and I might look troublesome. Too proud and I might look unfit for service. A poor girl's expression had to be useful too. A modern girl may prepare a school bag for the morning, but I prepared a small cloth bundle as if childhood itself could be packed and carried away. There were not many things to put in it. A spare shift, a worn pair of stockings, a brush, a few repairs folded into cloth. The bundle looked too small to hold a life, yet it held almost everything that was mine. Leaving home did not require much luggage because I had never owned much to begin with. I remember my mother standing near the door, fixing my collar with rough fingers. She pulled the cloth straight, then smoothed it again, even though it was already as good as it would get. Her face was careful. She did not want to frighten me, and I did not want to make her sadder by looking frightened. Beside us, the small bundle sat on the floor. It looked patient, waiting. In that moment, I understood something without wanting to. My mother was not only sending me away, she was handing me over to a world that would measure by speed, obedience, cleanliness, and whether I caused trouble. She could teach me to sew and bow my head, but she could not protect me once another household owned my hours. If a mistress disliked me, if gossip attached itself to my name, I could be sent back with little except shame. I think my mother's hands trembled because she knew she was teaching me how to survive, not how to be free. It does not look tender from the outside. It may sound like warnings, corrections, and repeated instructions. Underneath it is a mother trying to prepare a poor daughter for punishment. She did not have power, so she gave me habits. She did not have protection, so she gave me rules. Many girls in streets like ours were raised this way. We were not treated as children with long futures. Families needed wages. Employers needed cheap, young, obedient help. Society placed those needs together and called it proper. It was cleaner that way. No one had to say that poverty was pushing girls out of their homes. They could simply say we were entering service. That was the larger truth behind my mother's careful fingers. A poor girl did not always step into service because she chose it. Often she was carried there by rent, hunger, family duty, and the quiet belief that her own wishes could wait. The house I was leaving had been hard, but it was still ours. The house I was going toward would be larger, cleaner, and colder in a different way. I left with my collar straight, my bundle small, and my mouth trained to stay careful. Behind me was the poor room, where I had learned to be useful before I had learned to ask for anything. Ahead of me stood a grander house, and I would not enter it through the door meant for people who belonged there. The first time I saw the house, I stopped before I meant to. It stood larger than any place I had entered, with a polished front door. My little bundle felt smaller in my hand. My shoes carried dust from the road. I remember looking up at the windows, wondering how many rooms one family could need, then remembering I had not come here to wonder. I did not walk to the front door. That was the first lesson, even before anyone spoke. The front steps were for visitors, callers, tradesmen, and people whose names might be announced. I was told to go around the side, past the respectable part, toward the back where the work began. There was a yard there with a scullery door, a coal place, and a smell of damp stone, soap, ashes and cooking. I stood there with my bundle and tried not to look afraid. The back door did not look cruel. It was only a door. But I understood at once that it was not the same as the other one. A house could welcome one person through polished wood and send another around to the entrance near coal dust. I had been poor before, but poverty felt different beside a rich house that showed me which way to walk. Inside, the kitchen was busy, warm in places and cold in others. There were tables, pots, shelves, buckets, cloths, and people who moved as if they already knew every rule I had not yet learned. Someone glanced at my bundle, then at my shoes. I felt myself being measured. Could I work? Could I listen? Could I keep quiet? Could I be corrected without trouble? Those questions sat in the room before anyone asked my name. For a house that looked so peaceful from the street, it had a very quick way of teaching a poor girl where not to stand. I learned that I should not block the passage, should not stare too long at the silver, should not speak unless spoken to, and should not mistake a clean floor for a place where I belonged. Every object had a rule around it. Every doorway separated one kind of person from another. The danger was not that I would be lost in the house, though I nearly was. The danger was that I might learn my smallness too well. At home I had been poor, but I had known the room, the sounds of my family, and the place where I could sit. Here the rooms were grander, but none were mine. Even the air seemed divided. The front rooms held polished curtains and quiet carpets. The back held steam, ash, orders, and quick feet. My body reacted before I could think properly. My shoulders tightened. My hands gripped the bundle. My face tried to stay blank because fear might look childish and curiosity might look disrespectful. I wanted to ask where I should put my things, where I would sleep, when I would eat, and what work would be mine first. But the questions stayed inside me. A new maid did not arrive with questions. She arrived with her hands. A person today might walk into a new job and expect a desk, a name, and a clear beginning. But I entered through a back door and learned first that my place was below notice. No one meant it as a ceremony. That made it worse in a quiet way. The rules were settled before I came. The house had been running without me, and I was another pair of hands added. I remember being led through a narrow passage. It was not like the rooms I had glimpsed from outside. The wall was plain, the light weaker, the floor practical rather than pretty. Somewhere beyond, there were rooms made for comfort. Down here, everything was made for work. I could hear movement from the house, but I did not understand the pattern. A bell rang somewhere, and one servant looked up. That pulled her body before thought. Later, I saw the front hall from a distance. It was bright, ordered, and too clean for my steps. I saw a polished table, a mirror, and flowers that looked as if they had never known smoke. I did not walk into it. I only saw enough to know there were two houses inside the one house. One was shown to guests. One kept that first house alive. I still remember the feeling of standing between those two worlds, close enough to see comfort, but already being trained to enter it only when carrying something for someone else. That was the true first shock. The rich did not live in a different country. They lived above us, beside us, sometimes only a few steps away, protected by doors, bells, carpets, habits, and the simple understanding that we would move around them without disturbing them. The older servants did not have time to soften it for me. They had their own tasks, tired feet, and fear of being blamed. If one spoke sharply, I tried not to take it as hatred. A new girl could slow everyone down. A mistake from me could become trouble for someone higher in the house. So I watched. I watched how they carried trays, lowered their eyes, answered and disappeared when the family passed. By evening, my first fear had changed into a heavier kind of knowing. The house was not only large, it was arranged to remind people like me that size did not mean space for everyone. There were bedrooms I might clean but never sleep in, chairs I might dust but never rest on, tables I might set but never eat at, fires I might tend but never sit before. The work allowed me to be near everything and gave me ownership of nothing. That was the larger truth I began to understand at the back door. A Victorian house could look like one home from the outside, but inside it carried two lives under one roof. One life was meant to be seen, admired, visited and protected. The other moved behind doors, down passages, and up narrow stairs, keeping the first one smooth enough to look natural. I arrived with a small bundle, a careful face, and the foolish hope that doing well might make the house feel less strange. But the back door had already told me something honest before any mistress or housekeeper could say it. I was inside the house now, yet the first work waiting for me would prove how far inside a servant could be and still not belong. The first work given to me was not the kind I had imagined while walking toward the house. I had thought, in my way, that service might mean carrying tea, folding clean linen, standing quietly in bright rooms, and being near the polished life I had only seen from outside. Instead, I was sent down into the kitchen and scullery, where the floor was stone, the air was damp, and the work waited in piles. There were pots blackened at the bottom, pans with grease clinging to them, buckets of dirty water, ashes from the range, and cloths that never seemed to come clean. I was shown where to kneel, where to scrub, where to empty water, and where not to leave a mark. Nobody had to explain that I was at the lowest place. The work explained it. I was new, poor, young, and easy to correct, so the dirtiest tasks found me first. At home, I had washed and carried water before, but this felt different. In my mother's room, work was hard because we were poor. In this house, work was hard because comfort had to be protected from the sight of dirt. The family upstairs could sit in rooms that looked calm because somewhere below them, someone like me was scraping grease from a pot, shaking ash from a grate, and rubbing a floor until her knees went sore. For a house so proud of its clean tables and shining rooms, it was very willing to send a new girl straight to the dirt that made that shine possible. I learned this without bitterness at first. I was too busy trying not to make a mistake. A pot had to be washed properly. A bucket had to be carried without spilling. Ashes had to be moved without leaving black dust behind. If I did something slowly, someone noticed. If I did it badly, someone's noticed more. The danger was not only the dirt itself. Dirt could be washed from a hand, at least for a while. The harder thing was how quickly the work taught me what my position meant. I was close to a grand household, but not to its ease. I helped create cleanliness, but I did not get to enjoy it. The more I scrubbed, the clearer it became that beauty in that house depended on someone being bent low where visitors never looked. My body found out first. My back ached from leaning over the floor. My wrists hurt from cold water and harsh soap. My fingers grew red around the nails. My knees felt the stone through my skirt. Sometimes steam touched my face while my hands were still cold. By the end of the day, my body felt older than it had felt that morning, as if the house had taken a little of my strength and hidden it under the clean surfaces upstairs. I wanted to do well because doing well was the only safety I understood. If I could be quick, quiet, and useful, perhaps I would be kept. If I were kept, I could send a little money home. That thought mattered more than pride, so I swallowed the shame when I was told to clean what no one else wanted to touch. I swallowed the tiredness too. Poor girls are trained early to make swallowing look like patience. A person today might call this a first day at work, but mine began on my knees with a brush in my hand and dirty water beside my skirt. There was no neat beginning, no kind instruction, no soft place to learn slowly. I learned by being put in the middle of the mess and expected to understand quickly. The older servants had little time for comfort. They had orders to answer, blame to fear, and sore backs hidden under control. I remember one patch of floor near the range. It had been darkened by soot, grease, and years of feet passing over it. I scrubbed it until my arm shook. Each time it looked better, a shadow in the stone made me doubt myself. The small window lit the floor weakly, and I kept moving the brush, afraid someone would say I had left it dirty. My apron was marked. My dress was damp at the hem. My hair had slipped near my face, but I did not stop to fix it. I still think that was the moment when my little hope for respectable work became something much heavier and more honest. Service was not a clean word once you were inside it. It meant grease under the nails, ash on the cuffs, water soaking through cloth, and the need to make unpleasant things vanish before anyone important noticed. The house did not become beautiful by magic. It became beautiful because girls like me stood in the hidden parts and paid for it with our bodies. There was a lesson in that. Cleanliness in a rich house was not only a habit, it was an arrangement. Some people were allowed to live above the dirt. Others were placed close to it, ordered to fight it, and then expected to leave no sign of themselves behind. If the drawing room looked peaceful, the scullery was proof that peace had been purchased with someone else's labour. By night, I was too tired to feel disappointed. Hard work leaves little space even for sadness. I sat where I was allowed, with my hands rough and my shoulders heavy, and tried to remember that wages were the reason I had come. I had not entered service to be admired. I had entered because a poor girl needed a place, a wage, and the chance not to be sent home in failure. The larger truth became clear slowly as I'd learned the shape of that kitchen. A maidservant did not begin by being trusted with fine things. She began by proving she could endure the work nobody wished to see. Before any tray, any linen, any polite room, there was dirty water, black ash, and a stone floor that taught a girl where the house truly placed her. That first work took away my foolish idea that service would feel cleaner than poverty. It showed me that a beautiful house could stay beautiful only because some of us became dirty in its hidden rooms. And before long, I would learn that the dirt was not the hardest part, because the house expected us to rise before even the people we served opened their eyes. Morning in that house began before I felt ready to be awake. Darkness did not mean rest for us. It meant there was work to do before the family opened their eyes. I would rise while the corridors still held the night, while the kitchen floor felt cold through my shoes, and while the range sat black with yesterday's ash. My dress felt stiff when I pulled it on. My hands moved slowly at first. I learned not to wait for my body to agree. First came the fire. Without it, nothing else in the house could begin properly. Water would stay cold. Breakfast would be delayed. Rooms would keep their chill. So I bent near the range, cleared the old ash, arranged the coal, and tried to bring heat back into the grate. Sometimes my fingers were so cold that the coal felt almost warm against my skin. I worked carefully because smoke, spilled ash, or a weak flame could become my fault before the day had even properly started. I once thought sleep ended when someone called your name. In service, sleep ended because the house needed to look awake before its owners were. There was dust to wipe, water to heat, boots to check, grates to clear, and small things to put back where they belonged. The family upstairs could wake to comfort only because we had already moved through the cold parts of morning for them. For people who valued a peaceful breakfast, they depended very heavily on girls who had not yet had one. That thought never left my mind. It stayed where many thoughts stayed, behind my teeth. A maid did not begin the day by speaking. She began by lifting, carrying, wiping, bending, and listening for footsteps above. The danger in those mornings was not sudden, it was the slow wearing down of the body. One early morning was only tiring. Many early mornings became something else. My eyes burned. My back felt stiff before noon. My hands stayed red from water, coal, and rough cloth. When I knelt near the fire, heat touched my face while the rest of me stayed cold. I was always moving between warmth and chill, between darkness and light, between silence and order. There was no real time to wake gently. If I moved like a sleepy girl, I could be corrected like a lazy servant. That was the difference. A child might rub her eyes and be pitied. A servant rubbing her eyes could be judged. So I taught my face to look alert before my mind had fully entered the day. I tied my apron. I smoothed my hair. I made my hands useful before they were warm. A person now might press a button for heat and wait under a blanket, but I had to help build the morning with coal dust on my fingers. There was no simple switch that brought warmth into the kitchen. Warmth came from work, and the work came first. If the family found the rooms ready, they did not need to think about how readiness happened. That was part of the arrangement. Good service made labour disappear and memory. I remember one morning when the window was still black and the fire would not catch. The coal was stubborn, the kindling poor, and my hands shook slightly from cold. I crouched there, blowing carefully, trying not to scatter ash across the floor. A red glow appeared, faded, then appeared again. My apron had a grey smear across it. My eyes watered from the smoke. I kept trying because breakfast would not wait for my fingers to stop aching. I still remember how small I felt in front of that cold range, as if the whole house had placed its first demand on my hands before it had even spoken. No one upstairs knew my name in that moment. No one saw me kneeling there. But if the fire failed, someone would know quickly enough. That was often how our work was noticed. Not when it was done well, but when it failed to stay invisible. After the fire came the rest. Curtains had to be opened in certain rooms. Dust had to be removed before it could be seen. Water had to be carried where it was needed. The kitchen had to change from a cold, dirty place into a room ready for orders. The servants moved around one another with tired skill. Few words were needed. We knew morning was a race we were expected to finish quietly. The house above us slowly changed. First, there was darkness. Then a little warmth. Then the pale light in the rooms. Then the sounds of people waking. By the time the family stirred, we had already lived through the hardest part of the morning. They entered a day prepared for them. We entered the same day already sore. That was the plain truth of a servant's morning. Comfort did not begin by itself in a Victorian house. It was made early in cold rooms by people who were not meant to be seen. The polished life upstairs rested on fires lit in darkness, water carried in silence, and hands that had already grown tired before breakfast, before anyone thought to thank us. Those mornings taught me that being useful meant arriving before comfort and leaving no trace of the effort behind it. The house could wake gently because we had already fought its cold, its ashes, and its disorder in the dark. Once the rooms were ready, one small sound from the wall could take the little control I had left over my own day. Bells were part of the house before I understood them. They hung on the kitchen wall in a row, each one linked to a room above us. At first they looked harmless metal mouths with labels beneath them. Drawing room, dining room, morning room, bedroom, mistress, nursery. I looked at them while my hands were still damp from washing, and I did not yet know how quickly those little bells could change the shape of a day. After the morning fires were lit and the first rooms were made ready, I thought there might be a small order to things. A task begun, a task finished, then another task after it. That was how work made sense at home. In the house, sense belonged to the family, not to us. I could be scrubbing a pan, folding cloth, carrying water, or trying to swallow food when a bell trembled on the wall. The sound was small, but everyone felt it. When it first rang for me, my body moved before thought. Someone looked up, saw the label, and sent me. I wiped my hands on my apron, left the work half done, and hurried through the passage. I feared the wrong door, the wrong knock, the wrong words. The bell did not tell me what was wanted. It only told me that someone wanted, and I had to appear. For a household that prized calm manners, it had a sharp way of turning one little sound into panic below stairs. No one upstairs needed to shout. A finger pulled a cord, a bell moved in the kitchen, and a servant was pulled out of her own moment. It could happen during washing, eating, mending, or the rare minute when I leaned against a table. The danger was not the bell itself, it was what it taught us. Slowly I learned to listen without trying. My ears waited for it. My shoulders tightened when metal stirred. If a bell rang while I carried hot water, I hurried. If it rang while my meal sat before me, I left it. If it rang when I was halfway through another order, I had to judge which demand mattered more. My body became trained before I noticed. I ate faster. I worked with my head slightly lifted. I kept my hands ready to be cleaned at once. Even when I stood still, I was not resting. A part of me stayed near the wall of bells. The sound reached the body before thought. Delay could be called laziness. Confusion could be called stupidity. A poor girl could lose trust in small delays. A person now might silence a ringing phone for a moment. But I had no right to silence the house that called me. The bell was not a request. It was a reminder that my time had been hired away in pieces, and any piece could be taken without warning. I could begin a thought and lose it. I could sit with food and leave hungry. I could feel my feet ache and still answer as if I had been waiting gladly. I remember one afternoon in the kitchen, my hands covered in soap from washing dishes. The water was cloudy and my fingers felt raw. A bell shook above the label for the drawing room. I looked up with soap sliding down my wrist. For 1 second I wanted to finish the plate in my hand. Only one plate. Another servant glanced at me, and I knew that wanting even a second was too much. I set the plate down, wiped my hands badly, and went. I still remember that foolish little plate because it showed me how little of the day belonged to me. The plate stayed there, wet and waiting, as if my own work could be interrupted by work of higher importance. When I returned, the water was cooler. My meal later was cooler too. Nothing terrible had happened, so it was easy to accept. A servant's time was not stolen in one grand act. It was taken by bells, errands, corrections, and unfinished bites of bread. There was a lesson in the wall itself. Every labelled bell showed that the house was arranged around the comfort of people who did not need to come looking for us. They could remain in soft rooms while their wishes travelled through cords and metal. We stayed where the sounds could reach us. The system looked polite, but it kept our bodies alert all day. By evening, I could feel the bells even when they were silent. That was the worst part. Silence did not mean freedom. It meant waiting. I might sit in the servants' hall with a cup near my hand, but my ears still belonged to the wall. I might laugh softly at something another girl said, then stop because a bell moved. Rest was never fully rest when it could be ended from another room. That was the plain truth I learned under those little bells. A servant did not own a day by waking into it. She only borrowed minutes until someone upstairs required them back. The house was large, but our time inside it was narrow, broken, and watched by sound. The bells taught me that obedience could become a habit in the nerves before it became a thought in the mind. Even when no one spoke my name, the house had ways of reaching into my hands, my meal, and my breath. Soon I would learn that the same house not only called us from room to room, but it also gave us hidden paths, so our work could remain out of sight. Before long, I learned that the house had its own map, and it was not the same map the family lived by. The front staircase was polished and bright. Our world moved behind that one. I learned this quickly. We used the back staircase, narrow corridors, side doors, and dim turns of the house where a servant could pass with coal, linen, hot water, or a tray without disturbing the life above. At first, I was only trying not to lose my way. The house seemed to twist on purpose. One door opened into a passage. A passage led to a stair. The stair turned toward bedrooms, attics, storage rooms, and the working parts of the house. I watched the older servants carefully and followed them the way a child follows footsteps through mud. The back stairs became familiar faster than the fine rooms ever did. I learned which board gave a small cry under a heavy step, which turn was narrow enough to catch a skirt, which landing stayed colder than the rest, and which door must be opened softly because someone important might be beyond it. It is a strange kind of learning, coming to know a house best through the places where you are expected not to be noticed. A grand home could shine beautifully in the front and still hide an entire second life in the dark places behind it. They were not only practical stairs, they were a boundary. The family moved through the house as if comfort belonged to them naturally. We moved through it as if our usefulness should never interrupt that comfort. The danger in those hidden paths was not only the risk of slipping. The greater danger was the lesson repeated every day. I could carry the household through those passages, but I was not meant to appear in the finished picture. I might make the beds, polish the handles, empty the slops, carry the trays, and still be expected to pass like a shadow. If I was seen too much, it meant something in the household had been arranged badly. My body adjusted to the system before my mind made peace with it. I learned to turn sideways with a tray. I learned to keep my steps quick but quiet. I learned to climb with my hand near the rail and my eyes on the next landing, even when I was tired. A narrow staircase does not care whether your back aches or your wrists are weak. Sometimes, carrying a tray upward, I could see warm light spilling from the better part of the house. There would be carpet, soft voices, and a fire arranged for comfort instead of labour. Then I would turn back into the servant corridor, where the wall came close again, and the smell of kitchen work returned. The distance between those two worlds could be only a few steps, yet it felt greater than the road from my childhood home to the house itself. You can cross half a house in less than a minute and still know that you do not belong to the life unfolding only a few feet away. That feeling stayed with me. I knew the place well enough to move through it in the dark, yet knowing it did not make it mine. In some ways, it made the difference sharper. I knew exactly where comfort was kept, how near it was, and how carefully I had to move around it. One evening, I paused on the back stairs with a tray in my hands. Above me, light from a drawing room touched the upper wall. Below me, the darker turn dropped back toward the kitchen. I was standing between the two, not truly in either place. The tray felt heavier because I had stopped. My arm was already tiring, but for that brief moment I simply stood there and understood what the house had been teaching me. I think that stare taught me more about class than any sermon ever could, because it showed me how people can live under one roof and still be divided by habit, light, and permission. Nobody needed to explain it. The division was built into wood, stone, and routine. A servant did not need a lesson to understand her place. She only needed to notice which stairs she climbed and which staircase had been polished for someone else. There was also loneliness in it. Downstairs we were together at work, noise and hurry. Upstairs the family lived among the results. Between those two places lay the stairs, corridor, side door, and hidden turn. That was where I spent much of my day, carrying things from one life to another without belonging fully to either one. I was often in between, climbing and returning. That was the larger truth I learned in those dim passages. A servant's invisibility did not happen by chance. The house itself helped create it. Architecture, manners and routine worked together so that the labour could move while the labourer stayed easy to overlook. We knew every inch of the place, but our knowledge existed to protect someone else's ease, not our own belonging. By then, the back stairs felt more familiar to me than the open road outside, and that was not a comforting thing to realise. The more exactly I learned the hidden paths of the house, the more clearly I understood that I was being fitted into its machinery rather than welcomed into its life. Soon I would see that even when our work filled the house from cellar to bedroom, the marks it left behind would remain not on the furniture, but on our own hands. I began to understand the house through the things that had to shine. A mirror could not show fingerprints. A table could not show dust. Silver could not look dull under candlelight. Glass had to be clear and smooth. curtains had to hang without marks. The better the room looked, the more our work had been erased from it. After the back stairs became familiar, my hands became familiar with every surface that belonged to someone else. I rubbed, wiped, polished, shook, folded, and carried. Some things were heavy, some delicate, and costly enough to make me nervous. A scratch on a table or a stain on linen could bring anger quickly. My hands were trusted to clean valuable things, but not treated as valuable themselves. The work looked simple when it was finished. That was the trick of it. A guest entering a bright room saw order, not effort. They saw silver spoons laid neatly, not the servant standing over them until her fingers smelled of polish. They saw a clear mirror, not the cloth rubbed across the glass. They saw comfort arranged as if it had grown there by nature. It is almost funny how a house could praise spotless beauty while never looking too closely at the hands made rough enough to create it. Those hands were mine, and they did not stay soft. Soap dried the skin, cold water reddened it, metal polish caught in cracks, dust clung to the nails. By evening my fingers felt stiff, as if they had been bent around too many duties. There was danger hidden inside the idea of doing work well. If I cleaned poorly, I could be blamed. If I cleaned well, the work vanished, and so did I. A perfect room left no evidence that I had been there. That was what good service meant. No dust smears, no misplaced object, no sign of the girl who had bent her back to make it so. The better I became, the less visible I was allowed to be. My body carried the proof instead. My knees ached from kneeling by low grates. My shoulders tightened after shaking rugs or carrying water. My eyes burned when I had slept badly and still had to inspect for marks. My back learned an ache that did not always leave after lying down. These were not dramatic injuries, only the kind that gather quietly until a young woman begins to feel older than her face. I remember holding a set of silver spoons beside the kitchen light. Each one had to be bright enough for the dining room. I rubbed until my wrist hurt, turned each spoon, checked the bowl, checked the handle, and laid it down carefully. My fingers were red and cracked beside them. The contrast was too plain to ignore. One thing was meant to gleam, the other was meant to keep working. A shining spoon can look effortless on a table, especially when no one has to imagine the sore wrist that made it shine. Guests admired the setting. They noticed the sparkle. They might praise the household for being well kept. But praise rose upward, not downward. It belonged to the mistress, the house, the name at the door. The servant behind it remained part of the furniture until something went wrong. One afternoon I polished a mirror in a bedroom and caught my own face in it. I looked tired, though I tried to keep neat. A loose piece of hair had slipped near my cheek. My eyes looked red, and my apron had a faint grey line across it. Behind my reflection, the room looked ready for someone else. I stepped back, and my own face left the glass. I still think about that mirror because it held me only while I was cleaning it, then returned to belonging to someone else. That was what much of the service felt like. We were present only long enough to prepare comfort, then expected to step away before comfort began. We could touch objects, but not own them. We could enter rooms, but not rest in them. We could improve the house every day without improving our place inside it. There was a small lesson in every polished surface. Luxury does not stay beautiful on its own. It is guarded by labour, often by labour that becomes invisible when it succeeds. In that house, cleanliness was not only a habit. It was a sign that someone had money to hire others to fight dirt. The rich called it refinement. We knew it by the ache in our fingers. By the end of many days, I would look at my hands before sleep. They were not terrible hands, only used ones. Red at the knuckles, dry near the nails, sometimes where the skin had opened slightly. I did not pity them every night. I was too tired. Sometimes I saw them clearly and understood that the house had taken its shine from them. That was the larger truth of our work. A servant's labour was meant to leave beauty behind and carry damage away in the body. The polished table stayed polished. The silver went upstairs. The mirror kept its brightness. We carried the roughness back down with us, hidden in hands, backs, knees and eyes. The rooms looked cleaner each day, but my hands learned the cost of that cleanliness in a way no guest ever had to know. There was sadness in making another person's world look graceful while my own skin split around the proof. The dining room would teach me next that standing close to abundance could feel like another kind of hunger. The dining room was the place where I first learned that a person could stand close to plenty and still feel poor. Before service, I knew hunger in the usual way, with thin bread, weak tea, and the careful, quiet silence that came when there was not enough for more. But this was different. In that bright room, food arrived in courses, silver caught the light, glasses stood in rows, and clean napkins rested beside plates. I was not there to eat. I was there to carry, place, step back, wait, notice, and move again before anyone needed to ask twice. The room had its own rules, and most of them were about not becoming part of it. I could bring a dish near enough to smell the steam, but I had to lower my eyes. I could hear laughter, but I could not smile, as if I had joined it. I could hear a compliment about the meal, though the hands that had helped prepare it were nowhere in the compliment. The silver I carried had passed through workrooms before it reached that table. Someone had polished it, checked the glass, folded the napkins, carried the plates, watched the fire, and hurried until the whole scene looked calm. By the time the family sat down, all that effort had been made tidy enough to disappear. It was a clever kind of refinement, really, to make so many tired people necessary, and then arrange the room as if none of us was there. I kept my face still when such thoughts came. A maid could be hungry, tired, or hurt, but she was not supposed to look as if she had an opinion. So I stood behind a chair with my hands folded in front of my apron, feeling heat on my face and ache in my feet. Standing still was harder than I had expected. Scrubbing made the body hurt, honestly. Dining room service made it hurt quietly. My shoulders had to stay set. My hands had to be ready. My eyes had to see without staring. If a glass was emptied, I noticed. If a plate was finished, I noticed it. If someone shifted in a chair, I wondered whether I should move. Even silence became a task when it had to be held in place for so long. There were evenings when the table seemed too full to be real. Meat, bread, vegetables, puddings, sauces and wine moved across the cloth while my own meal waited somewhere else, smaller and later. Not every family was cruel at every meal. That would be too simple. The harder thing was how ordinary it all looked. Their comfort did not need to hate us. It only needed to continue without thinking much about us. A table full of food can make a person feel poorer than an empty shelf, because an empty shelf does not ask you to stand beside it politely. I learned not to look too long at what was left on plates. Scraps could be dealt with later. Hunger had to be managed inside the body, not shown on the face. A servant who appeared too eager around food could be judged as coarse, and judgment could travel faster than kindness. One evening, I remember a piece of bread left almost untouched beside a plate. It was not special bread. A guest had broken it, taken a little, and forgotten the rest while the talk moved on. I looked at it for only a second, then looked down again. At home, that piece would have been saved, shared, or wrapped away for later. Here, it was only part of the remains of a meal. What hurt most was not always the hunger itself, but the way waste could look so harmless when it belonged to people who had never needed to count it. I did not have the words for class then, not properly. I only knew that I was close enough to see the difference and far enough away to feel it. The table did not need to explain anything. It placed some people in chairs and others behind them. After dinner, the room changed again. The guests left crumbs, folded napkins, marked glasses, and unfinished bits behind. We gathered what remained. Plates went down. Silver returned to be what geste. The cloth checked. The room that had seemed graceful became work once more. Upstairs, the evening could be remembered as pleasant. Downstairs, it became another pile of dishes and another stretch of tired hands. Looking back, I think that was where I began to understand recognition as another kind of food. We did not only want to eat. We wanted someone to see that the meal had not appeared by itself. We wanted the standing, carrying, waiting, washing and clearing to count for something. But service often worked best when no one had to think about the servant for long. A dining room could hold a whole society in one small arrangement. Some sat in that room, some stood. Some spoke freely, some answered only when required. Some left food behind, some carried it away. None of it needed to be shouted. It was quiet, polished, and very clear. That room did not starve me in the old way, but it showed me a hunger that bread alone could not answer. I wanted food at times, yes, but I also wanted someone to understand that standing behind a chair can wear down a person as surely as scrubbing a floor. What I heard and saw inside that house would soon become its own burden, because a servant was expected to remember every order and forget every secret. After the dining room, the servants' hall felt like a place where my body could remember it was tired. There was no polished table, no bright glass, no careful silence behind a guest's chair. There was a plain wooden table, hard chairs, rough dishes, and weak light for people who had already spent most of themselves. I remember lowering myself onto a chair, feeling my feet throb. For a moment, that was enough. Before we return to that wooden table below stairs, take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe if these forgotten lives are the history you want to hear. We did eat there, but eating did not mean the same thing as it did upstairs. Upstairs, a meal could stretch and become conversation. In the servants' hall, food was taken quickly because work had only stepped aside. A bell might ring, a message might come, a plate might be pushed away before it is empty. I learned to eat with one ear open and one hand ready to leave the table. The warmth in that room was real, but never complete. We sat close enough to see each other's tiredness clearly. A girl's red hands could tell what kind of morning she had endured. A cook's stiff walk could say more than a complaint. A quiet look could carry a whole day of understanding. There were small kindnesses, a bit of bread nudged across the table, a tired smile when words would have taken too much effort. It was a comfort of sorts, but only the kind allowed to people who might be called away before the bread was finished. Nobody said that aloud. We already knew it. Rest below stairs had to be light enough to lift at once. A servant could not sink too deeply into her chair, her meal, or her own thoughts. The house might need her again. I had thought when I first came that servants might be equal because we all worked under the same roof and answered to the same family. That was a young girl's mistake. The servants' hall had its own ladder. The housekeeper had her place. The cook had hers. Senior servants spoke with more weight. A newer girl like me learned when to answer, when to listen, and where to sit. It was not always cruel. A sharp word might come from a woman whose own day had already been made sharp by orders from above. Still, the shape was clear. Even below stairs, some people had more room than others. Some voices could fill the room. Some had to stay small. Sharing the same table did not make us equal, any more than living under the same roof made the family and servants one household. I saw that in little things. Who took the food first? Who was interrupted? Who could complain safely? Who laughed without fear of being thought improper? A chair could be plain wood and still carry a rank. Nobody needed to carve into it. My body wanted the servants' hall to be a refuge. It wanted the chair to mean rest. It wanted the food to mean peace. But habit followed me even there. I sat with my back not fully loose, my hands near my lap, my eyes aware of movement. If the bell sounded, I was ready to rise. If a senior servant looked my way, I measured my face. One evening has stayed with me because nothing terrible happened. The meal was simple. Rain made the kitchen yard dark. The room smelled of boiled food, damp cloth, and fading heat. We sat around the table with our plates close to us. Someone made a tired remark and a few faces softened. Not loudly, not freely, just enough to remind me that the people around me had lives under their aprons and caps. I remember that small softening more than the meal itself, because it was one of the few times we looked like people before we looked like servants. It passed quickly, as most gentle things did in that house. A chair scraped. Someone rose. A bell moved somewhere on the wall, and the room tightened again. The softness did not vanish because anyone hated it. It vanished because the house had use for us. The servants' hall stayed complicated in my memory. It gave us a place to sit, but it did not return the day to us. It gave us company, but kept the order that divided us. It allowed us to eat, but never let us forget that our meal was fitted between other people's needs. Sometimes I wondered whether the family upstairs imagined us below as one simple group, eating and resting in the servants' space. They would not have seen the careful ranks, swallowed tiredness, short kindnesses, and glances toward the bells. They would not have understood that a person can sit down and remain on duty inside her own body. The servants' hall was not happy, and not only sad. We recovered just enough to continue. It was where we learned who might be kind, who might be dangerous, who carried loneliness, and who had already hardened herself to last. It was a room of bread, rules, tired faces, and small human warmth that never belonged fully to us. In that room, I learned that sitting down is not always the same as being allowed to rest. We could share bread, glances, and small kindnesses, yet the house still arranged our comfort by rank. What we heard beyond that table would become harder to carry, because a servant was trusted with secrets only if she behaved as if she had none. By now, I had learned that a house could speak even when nobody addressed me. It spoke through footsteps stopping outside a door, through a cup set down too hard, through a voice lowered when a servant entered. I was sent into rooms with towels, trays, linen, coal scuttles, and messages. I was expected to arrive, serve, and leave, but leaving was never as clean as people imagined. At first, I thought secrets were rare things, hidden in locked drawers or whispered at night. In that house, they were much more ordinary. A bill left open on a desk, a letter pushed under a book, a quarrel was cut short when I came in, a husband and wife sitting far apart. I did not need to search for anything. The house placed its private life in front of me and expected me not to have a memory. I learned to lower my eyes without closing my ears. That was the skill. If the mistress spoke sharply to the master as I set down a tray, I heard enough and showed nothing. If a daughter had been crying before I entered, I noticed the red eyes and kept my hands steady. If a visitor's name made the room tighten, I remembered the tone, but did not let it reach my face. It was a polished kind of trust, letting servants carry the family's private world while pretending we were too unimportant to understand it. We were near everything because someone had to keep rooms clean, fires lit, clothes ready, and meals moving. Yet we had to behave as if nearness had given us no knowledge. A maid who knew too much was useful, only if she looked as if she knew nothing. There were moments when my body betrayed the strain. My jaw stayed tight after leaving a tense room. My hands shook when I heard anger behind a door and still had to knock. I learned to breathe quietly before stepping in. I learned not to pause in a hallway, even when a conversation on the other side made my stomach pull inward. Curiosity was dangerous, so was sympathy. Once I stood outside a partly open door with a folded towel in my hands. Inside, the master and mistress sat apart, not speaking at first. The room was warm, but the silence felt colder than the passage. I looked at the carpet near my shoes. A money word was spoken, then another about a letter. I knew I should not hear, yet I had heard enough to understand that comfort upstairs had cracks. A person can keep a diary locked in a drawer, but a servant in the room may become the diary no one meant to write. I carried such things silently, not because I was noble, and not because silence felt easy. I carried them because speaking could damage me faster than it damaged the people being spoken about. A poor girl's reputation did not need much weight to break. A hint that I gossiped could follow me into another household. A mistress could dismiss me, and truth might not help. Every servant learned caution differently. Some became hard and said little. Some enjoyed scraps of gossip below stairs, though even there one had to be careful. A word passed to the wrong person could climb upward and return as punishment. I listened more than I spoke. It made me seem quiet. In truth, I was often measuring which parts had to be buried inside me. The house expected memory when it served the family. I had to remember which room needed coal, which linen belonged where, which visitor preferred what, and which instruction had been given in passing. But I had to forget other things on command. Forget the raised voice, forget the unpaid account, forget the cold look between husband and wife. Remember the order, forget the pain. I did not know then how heavy it could be to carry other people's secrets without being allowed to admit they had weight. A servant was not a wall, though we were treated like one. We absorbed voices, shame, fear, and small cruelties. Then we went downstairs and washed cups, folded cloth, and answered bells as if our minds had not been filled by rooms above. There was sadness in seeing the family's life so closely and still being outside it. Their troubles did not make us equal. They could quarrel in private rooms, pay debts late, hide disappointments, and remain people with name, property, and protection. If I made one wrong use of what I knew, I could lose my place. So I learned to let my face become plain. Not empty, exactly, but careful. A servant's face could not be knowing, pitying, amused, or shocked. It had to be smooth enough for others to keep their dignity. I gave them that smoothness because my employment depended on it. What I remember most is not one great secret. It is the daily practice of pretending not to notice. The door was left ajar, the stopped conversation, the letter was hidden too late, the sadness in a mistress's room, the anger in a master's voice. Each small thing passed into me and stayed there without a proper place to go. I learned that silence was not empty. It was often full of things a servant had survived hearing. The house needed my eyes lowered, my hands busy, and my memory obedient in ways no one ever thanked. Before long, even my own youth would begin to feel like something I had been asked to put away quietly, along with every other private thing I was not supposed to show. My youth did not feel stolen at first. It felt busy. That is how it happened. A morning began too early. A floor needed washing, a bed needed making, a bell rang, a tray had to be carried, and by the time I looked up, another day had already been spent for someone else. I was still young in years, but the house had a way of making youth feel like a garment kept folded away for a better day. Other girls, I imagined, might want a new ribbon, a walk in the street, a dance, a sweetheart, or a future of her own. I thought about whether I had time to mend my stockings before morning. I thought about wages, references, scolding, the next place, the next order, the next mistake I had to avoid. A maidservant's mind did not often wander far, because work kept pulling it back. My body grew into the work as if the work had been waiting for it. My hands became harder. My shoulders learned to lift and carry. My back found its own ache, steady enough to remind me. My face began to look tired in small ways. Not old, only less light than I might have been. It is a strange kind of girlhood when people praise you for being sensible, but sensible only means you have learned to stop asking for much. I was useful, and usefulness brought safety. It helped me keep my place. It made me less likely to be dismissed, but usefulness also made it harder to remember that I had once wanted things without knowing how to earn them. There were hours when I felt my age return for a moment. Passing a shop window, I might notice a dress I would never buy. Hearing laughter from girls outside on a half day, I might wonder what it felt like to walk without counting time. Seeing a young woman with clean gloves and unhurried steps could make me aware of my own apron, my rough fingers, and my tired face. Nothing about this looked dramatic from the outside. I was not locked in a room. I was not crying every night. Most days I simply worked. That was the quiet part of it. A life can be narrowed by ordinary duties until there is not much room left for imagining. No single task took my youth away. It was the piling up of small ones. My room under the roof was narrow, and I often reached it with feet that hurt before I had even taken off my shoes. The bed was not cruel, only small. A chair, a peg for clothes, a little space for what belonged to me. Some nights I sat on the edge of the bed and untied my shoes slowly, because bending down felt like another task. A girl with time can dream while brushing her hair, but I often brushed mine only enough for work. That was the difference I felt most. Even the care of myself became part of the service. Clean enough for the house, neat enough to avoid complaint, presentable enough to be overlooked. My body belonged to me in name, but in practice it was kept ready for other people's needs. Once I sat on that narrow bed and looked at an old dress hanging from the wall. It was not fine, but it was not my working dress. I had kept it for some day without hurry. The fabric looked tired too. I remember feeling no clear sadness, only emptiness, as if I had forgotten what kind of hope had once been attached to it. What stayed with me was the smallness of that moment, sitting alone with sore feet, and realizing I could not remember wanting something freely. I had wanted to sleep. I had wanted not to be blamed. I had wanted the correct wages. I had wanted my mother to manage at home. Those were useful wishes, but they were not the same as dreaming. We did not speak much about such things below stairs. Some girls joked, some grew sharp, some held on to a sweetheart if they could. Many of us learned to keep our private hopes small, because large hopes made days harder. A small hope could fit inside a pocket and be carried quietly without causing too much pain at night after work. Not every single minute was misery. There were kind looks, small laughs, warm tea, a letter from home, a kind word, and the relief of finishing a hard day without scolding. But those bits of comfort did not return what the work had taken quietly. They helped me last, not become young again. It made me understand that growing up was not always the same as moving toward freedom. Sometimes it meant becoming strong enough to endure a life chosen by need, while everyone around you called that strength good sense. By the time I understood this clearly, I had already changed. Work had not only trained my hands, it had trained my wanting. I had become careful with desire, careful with speech, careful with my face, careful in rest. A maidservant could grow into womanhood and still feel that her own life had been kept waiting outside the door. My youth did not leave me in one terrible moment. It thinned slowly through early mornings, late nights, and the habit of putting myself last. I carried that loss quietly, because quiet losses were the only kind the house allowed us to keep. When affection finally came near my life, it would not arrive freely either, because even love had to pass through rules, reputation, and the back door. Affection, when it came near a young maidservant, had to arrive quietly. It came in spare minutes, in a glance across a yard, in a few words near a gate, in a Sunday walk that ended too soon. I was young enough to feel my heart move, but old enough to know that a poor girl's heart was not treated as a private thing. The first man I noticed was not grand. He worked with his hands quietly enough, the way most people near my life did. I saw him from the backyard sometimes, near the gate or passing along the lane with tools, boots marked by work, and a face that looked tired without being hard. He did not speak fine words, and perhaps that helped. I only noticed when he was there, and then noticed harder when he was not. That was how feeling began for me, not with freedom, but with caution. If I looked too long, someone might see. If I smiled too openly, someone might remember. If I stepped toward him at the wrong time, the story could become larger than the truth. In service, even a harmless affection could be turned into a mark against a girl. Reputation was a thin cloth. It was a neat little cruelty, really, that rich young people could call romance charming, while a servant girl had to make even liking someone look like a mistake she had not yet committed. I learned to keep my face guarded. A glance had to be short, A greeting had to sound ordinary. My hands could tighten around my shawl, but my voice had to stay plain. Wanting notice became mixed with fearing notice. The fear was practical before it was moral. A maid accused of being loose, forward, or careless could lose her place. Losing a place meant more than leaving a house. It could mean no good reference, no next position, no wages to send home, and a name passed between employers with a raised eyebrow. My body learned the fear in small ways. My stomach tightened when footsteps came near while I stood in the yard. My face warmed if another servant teased me, even gently. I walked back inside too quickly, then felt foolish for leaving. The longing was not dramatic. It was worse because it was ordinary. I wanted to speak without calculating. I wanted to stand a little longer without thinking of dismissal. There was a late afternoon, I remember clearly. The yard had a dull light, and the house behind me was busy. I held my shawl at my chest, more from nervousness than cold. He stood near the far gate, not close enough to make anything improper, but near enough for me to feel suddenly aware of my own hands, hair, apron, and face. I wanted to step forward. I stayed where I was, with the house behind me like a warning. People speak as if love belongs to the heart, but for girls like me, it also belongs to references, wages, locked doors, and other people's mouths. A mistress might forgive a broken cup more easily than a rumour. A housekeeper could hear something small and make it serious. Another servant might repeat a glance, because gossip gave the tired a bit of excitement. Gossip could warm a tired room for a moment, and burn a girl for much longer. Still, knowing that did not make it easier. Affection made me feel visible in a way I was not used to. In the house I was useful when unnoticed. With him, even from a distance, I felt seen as a young woman and not only as a pair of working hands. That feeling was gentle, and gentle things were easy to lose. I did not dream foolishly for long. A maidservant had to think about consequences even when her heart wanted to be simple. Marriage could mean leaving service, but it could also mean more poverty if the man's wages were low. Staying in service could mean safety, but it asked me to keep my life narrow. A wrong step could take away both possibilities. Even hope needed permission from money. What hurt me most was not that I could not love, but that even love had to stand outside and wait for the house to be finished with me. I could be called away in the middle of a thought. A bell could ring, a door could open. Someone could need water, coal, a message, or a tray. My own life always seemed to wait behind someone else's need. Below stairs, some girls warned one another. Some spoke with bitterness. Some had already lost places over men who had not stayed. Some were still hoping. No one needed to say that a servant's good name was a kind of currency. It could not buy happiness, but without it, she could be ruined very quickly. Looking back, I do not think feelings were unusual. I was not asking for scandal, only for a small human tenderness. But the world around me had made tenderness risky. It asked poor girls to be clean, obedient, modest, useful, and grateful, then punished them if their hearts did not stay as controlled as their hands. So I learned to keep affection small, folded away like a private scrap of cloth hidden under better things. The back gate, the glance, the unfinished word, all of it belonged to a life that could be damaged by being seen too clearly. A rumour did not need to be true to reach a mistress's ear, and once it did, the little safety I had built could begin to fall apart. A rumour did not need to be loud to frighten a maidservant. It only needed to move from one mouth to another with enough certainty for someone above us to believe it. A probate could be explained, perhaps paid for, perhaps remembered for a week. A poor name was different. Once a girl was thought dishonest, lazy, forward, or improper, the mark did not stay in one room. It followed her. I learned this before any rumour truly settled on me. I saw how quickly a look could change. A small coin is missing from a table. A ribbon was not found where it had been left. A whisper that a maid had been seen speaking too warmly at the gate. Nobody needed proof at first. Suspicion itself was enough to make the air around a girl colder. A maidservant lived on more than wages. She lived on trust, and trust was not held in her own hands. It belonged to mistresses, housekeepers, references, and the opinion of people who could dismiss her with a few words. If I lose my place badly, I might not only lose one house, I might lose the next one before I ever reach its door. A servant could scrub a floor until her fingers split, yet one careless whisper might weigh more than all the work she had done. That was what made reputation so frightening. It was not built by the servant alone. It could be damaged by others, by boredom, resentment, mistake, or someone needing a person lower than themselves to blame. There were rules around everything. Do not linger near valuables. Do not answer sharply. Do not laugh too freely with men. Do not look idle. Do not seem proud. Do not seem too pretty. Do not seem too plain and sulky. A poor girl had to walk through the house as if her character could be judged by every movement. In many ways, it was. My body knew that pressure. If something went missing, my stomach tightened before anyone named me. If the housekeeper called sharply, my hands went cold. If the mistress looked at me too long, I began searching my memory for every small thing I might have done wrong. That kind of fear makes a person live carefully, even when she is innocent. I remember standing before the housekeeper with my hands clenched in my apron. A small item had been misplaced, nothing grand, but enough to make the room sharp. My trunk was already in my mind before anyone mentioned it. That was how quickly a servant imagined the end. A question could sound like dismissal before the decision had been made. People with secure lives can call gossip unpleasant, but for a girl like me, it could mean a packed box, no wages, and a door closing behind her. There was no proper court for every small accusation inside a household. The mistress might listen, she might not. The housekeeper might know the truth. She might decide the safest answer was to send the weakest person away. The most dangerous rumours were those about a girl's conduct. A maid thought too friendly with a man could be ruined even if nothing had happened. A girl who became pregnant outside marriage could be turned out with little pity. People liked to speak of morality, but morality often struck hardest at those with the least shelter. A richer woman might be protected by family silence. A servant had only her name, and even that was kept in other people's mouths. I used to fear my own face in those moments. Looking frightened could be taken as guilt. Looking calm could be taken as boldness. Crying could seem childish. A silence could seem secretive. Explaining too much could seem like lying. So I lowered my eyes, answered carefully, and felt the small, terrible trap of having no safe expression. What stays with me is the unfairness of needing permission from the powerful not only to work, but to be believed. A good reference could carry a girl forward. A poor one could close the road. A mistress' few lines on paper might decide whether another household opened its back door to me. My labour belonged to my body, but my future often belonged to someone else's pen. Below stairs, we all knew this. We warned one another without saying everything. Do not be alone near the silver. Do not leave your box unlocked. Do not trust every friendly word. Do not let a joke travel upward. These warnings did not make life safer exactly. They made us more watchful. Being watchful became another part of the work. A rumour could also make the other servants step away. Not always from cruelty, sometimes from fear. If one girl was marked, standing too close to her could feel risky. Kindness had to measure itself against survival. That may have been one of the saddest parts. Poverty made us need one another, but the household taught us to protect ourselves first. I did not see this as a system then. I saw it as a knot in the stomach, a careful answer, a trunk near the bed, a folded reference kept like a fragile document of life. I saw it in girls who left quickly, with red eyes and little explanation. I saw it in the way the house continued after they were gone, as if a whole future had not just been pushed out through the back door. Reputation was supposed to be about character. For us, it was also about power. The people who judged us had rooms, money, names, and the right to be heard. We had service books, references, and the hope that our silence looked respectable enough to pass. A rumour could begin as almost nothing, yet it could make years of obedience feel suddenly useless. I learned to guard my name as carefully as any silver spoon, because both could be missed, questioned, and used against me. Inside the servants' world, even fear had a rank, and the next thing I learned was that some hands below stairs could command other hands almost as firmly as the family did. Rank below stairs was something I noticed first in the way people stood. The housekeeper did not need to raise her voice for the room to change. The cook could turn a kitchen quiet with one look. A senior housemaid could make a younger girl move faster before a word was finished. I had entered service thinking of the family above us as the great power in the house, but soon I saw that power had smaller copies below. A new maid learned this through correction. I learned which servant could tell me where to go, which one could scold me, which one could report me, and which one I should never answer too quickly. The household was not simply divided between masters and servants. It was divided again and again until every person seemed to stand above someone and below someone else. The housekeeper was the clearest example. She wore dark clothes, kept her keys linen, watched the maids, spoke to the mistress, and carried herself like a door that could close without warning. When she entered, my back straightened before I meant it to. I did not fear her the way I feared the mistress, but I feared what she could make the mistress believe. Poverty did not make us equal. It only gathered us under the same roof and then taught us who was allowed to press down on whom. I had hoped that sharing tiredness might create more kindness. Sometimes it did. More often, the order of her house had already entered everyone's bones. A scullery maid could fear the kitchen maid could fear the cook, a housemaid could fear the housekeeper. The footman might think himself above the maids, even when his own life was ruled by bells and orders. Everyone carried the family's authority in some smaller form. By the time an instruction reached me, it might have passed through several hands. I understood why some of it happened. A senior servant could be blamed for a younger one's mistake. The cook could suffer if the kitchen failed. The housekeeper could lose trust if linen, dust, schedules, or conduct slipped. Responsibility made people hard. Fear from above became discipline below. Still, knowing the reason did not make the feeling lighter when I stood with my eyes lowered. One morning I had folded the cloth badly. Not ruined it, not dirtied it, only folded it in a way that displeased the housekeeper. She held it up between her fingers, as if the cloth itself had betrayed her. Other servants were near enough to hear. I felt my face heat. My hands went still at my sides. I wanted to say I would fix it, but too many words could sound like insolence. In some homes, a mistake might be a lesson, but in ours, it could become a small public lowering of the head. Rank did not always need punishment. Sometimes it only needed witnesses. A correction heard by others placed you more firmly where you belonged. You became careful not only of the task, but of the eyes around it. The body learns hierarchy in little gestures. I stepped aside more quickly for some servants than others. I kept my voice smaller near the housekeeper. I watched the cook's mood before asking anything. I held my shoulders differently when someone senior inspected my work. After a while, obedience was not only for the family. It spread through the lower house. What made it harder was that senior servants were not always wrong. Some were skilled, exhausted, and trapped inside the same structure with more responsibility and less mercy than I imagined. The cook had to produce meals under pressure and heat. The housekeeper had to hold the order so that any flaw could be blamed downward. Their power was real, but it was not freedom. I have more pity for them now than I did then, though pity would not have softened my fear when I stood before a dark dress, a hard face, and a row of silent servants behind me. At the time, I only felt the tightness in the room. I saw the housekeeper's keys. I saw the others looking down or away. I saw how quickly a person could become small in front of someone only slightly larger in rank. Below stairs, people spoke of fairness less than survival. A senior place meant better food, better standing, perhaps a warmer room, perhaps a little more control over the day. Those things mattered. A lifetime of being ordered can make even a narrow authority feel precious. The house allowed servants to discipline other servants, and that made the whole system easier to keep. So I learned to read not only the family, but the servants too. Who was kind when no one watched? Who used rank like a stick? Who was dangerous when tired? Who could be trusted with a mistake? This knowledge did not make me free. It only helped me move through the day with fewer bruises. Below stairs was like a smaller version of the world above, plain furniture instead of polished rooms, but the same habit of placing people in order. We were all servants, yet that word covered many distances. Some carried keys, some carried trays, some carried coal, some carried blame. By then I understood that service was not one chain pulling downward, but many small links tightened by different hands. Even among people who shared the same tired air, there were steps to climb, places to fall, and voices that could make another person shrink. When I became better at the work, the house began to trust me with more, but trust did not open the door I had once hoped it might. Years in service changed the way I moved through the house. I no longer looked at every door as if it might catch me by surprise. I knew where the clean linen was kept, which room needed dusting first, which chair should not be shifted, and how the mistress liked the table arranged. My hands became quicker, my steps became quieter. I could enter a room, see what was wrong, fix it, and leave before anyone had much reason to notice me. That was called improvement. In a way, it was. I was no longer the frightened girl at the back door, clutching a small bundle and trying to remember every rule at once. I could fold cloth neatly, polish without leaving marks, carry a tray without trembling, and answer with enough care to avoid trouble. The house had trained me well, and I had learned because learning meant fewer scoldings. Still, skill did not feel like freedom. It felt more like being fitted properly into a narrow place. The better I became, the more the house trusted me with work, not with life. A trusted servant might enter finer rooms, handle better linen, or receive instructions directly. She might be corrected less sharply. She might even be praised for being steady. But she still rose early, slept late, and stood behind other people's comfort. It is a curious reward being told you are reliable because you have become very good at needing almost nothing. I did not say that, of course. I accepted the small approval when it came. A kind word could carry a person through a long day, but praise in service often meant I had disappeared properly. I had made no fuss. I had caused no delay. I had left no trace of tiredness behind. My body had become part of the routine. I knew how to bend without slowing, how to lift from the knees when I remembered, how to hide a wince when my back tightened. My feet found passages almost without thought. My eyes checked corners, tabletops, cloth edges, hearths, and door handles. Even when I was not being watched, the house had left its watchfulness inside me. There were small benefits. I will not pretend there were none. A senior servant might trust me with a task instead of standing over me. The housekeeper might speak with less suspicion. I could sometimes correct a younger girl gently before she was corrected harshly by someone else. I had learned where anger came from and where it might fall. That knowledge helped me survive, but knowing how to survive a place is not the same as owning a future. My wages were still small. My hours still belonged to the household. My references still depended on people above me. If I wanted to leave, I needed permission shaped into paper and words. If I stayed, I kept my place, but my place remained a servant's place. A person can become an expert at a job and still not be allowed to become much larger inside it. That was one of the quieter disappointments. I had gained skill, but the walls around me had not moved. I could set a room beautifully, yet not sit in it. I could prepare a bed properly, yet return to my own narrow one under the roof. I could understand the family's habits better than some relatives did, yet I remained outside the circle of belonging. One afternoon, I stood in the drawing room adjusting a cloth on a polished table. The light was good, and for once there was no urgent sound from the bell. I smoothed one corner, stepped back, then leaned forward again to correct a fold so small no guest would likely notice it. My hands knew the motion. My face was calm. Anyone watching might have thought I had become perfectly suited to the work. That was what unsettled me. I had become suited to it. Not happily, not completely, but enough that the house no longer felt strange in the same way. Its rules live in me now. I could tell when a room was wrong by entering it. I could guess what would be asked before it was asked. I had grown into the very life that had once frightened me. What I find saddest is that I mistook fewer scoldings for progress, because a poor girl learns to treat a smaller hurt as a kind of kindness. I do not blame myself for that. A life with less daily fear can feel like an improvement when fear has been ordinary. If the mistress passed without complaint, if the housekeeper nodded, if the day ended without accusation, I could feel almost fortunate. Other servants changed too. New girls came in with wide eyes and awkward hands. I recognized their fear because I had worn it before. Sometimes I wanted to tell them that they would learn. Sometimes I wanted to warn them that learning would not save them from everything. But the service left little room for speeches, and advice often sounded like a correction when it came from someone tired. As years passed, I understood that the house did not need me to be happy. It needed me to be useful, steady, and quiet. My skills made the household smoother. It made my own days less chaotic, perhaps, but not truly mine. The same bells called, the same back stairs waited, the same careful face returned each morning. There was no single moment when I saw this clearly. It came through repeated days. A room done well, a word of approval. A task was added because I could be trusted. A younger girl was sent to me for instruction. Each thing made me seem more secure, while keeping me tied to the same pattern. The house had not opened. I had only learned that I could be used with less supervision. By then, I no longer moved through the rooms like a frightened child, but that did not mean the rooms had become mine. The house trusted my hands, my memory, and my silence, yet it never trusted me with much of my own time. Caring for the children would place me close to a future being carefully prepared, and none of its doors had been built for me. Caring for the children changed the house in a way I had not expected. The nursery was not like the kitchen or the scullery. It had toys, small chairs, picture books, folded clothes, and a softer disorder that belonged to childhood. Yet I entered with a tray, a jug of milk, clean stockings, or a brush in my hand. Even there, I was still there to serve. The children were not always unkind. Some were sweet before they learned too much from adults. A little girl might hold out her foot while I tied her shoe. A boy might ask for something without understanding that asking was already a command in his mouth. They did not invent the difference between us. They were born into it and taught it so early that it looked natural. I dressed them, brushed their hair, picked up toys, warmed milk, carried messages, and kept their rooms in order. I knew which child cried easily, which one hid sweets, which one feared the dark, and which one hated a tight collar. A servant can become close to a child without ever becoming family. There is a quiet absurdity in buttoning a child into fine clothes, while knowing your own childhood had been buttoned up and put away before it was finished. I did not blame the child for that. The little girl in front of me had soft stockings, clean ribbons, and someone to worry if she coughed. I had once had cold water, chores, and a mother too tired to worry gently. What made it ache was the tenderness. If I had disliked them, perhaps the feeling would have been simpler, but I often cared. I cared whether the baby settled. I cared if the little girl cried after being scolded. I cared if a boy looked frightened by a stern father. My hands could be gentle even when my life had not been treated gently. Service could make you give care you had never received in the same measure. Their future was being arranged while they still played on the floor. Lessons came. Music was practiced. Good manners were corrected. Clothes were chosen with care. Visits were discussed. Family names, schools, marriages, and inheritances floated above their heads long before they understood any of it. Their lives were prepared like rooms before guests arrived. A child with a lesson book in her lap can look ordinary enough until you remember that some of us were handed brushes, pails, and warnings instead. That thought came to me while I stood near the nursery window one afternoon. The girl sat with a book, frowning at a line of letters. I was folding her clothes. She complained that the lesson was dull. I almost smiled, not cruelly, because dullness can be a luxury when it belongs to learning instead of labour. My body had learned work by then, but the nursery reminded me of the part of life I had skipped. I could kneel to fasten a shoe and feel the pull in my back. I could lift a child and feel my arms remember buckets. I could tidy toys and think of the few things I had owned as a girl. These thoughts came quietly while I was smoothing a collar or placing a book back on a shelf. One evening I tied a little girl's shoe while she sat in a chair near the fire. Her dress was pale and the room was warm. She swung her foot slightly, impatient to be done. I held the lace, tightened it, and made the bow even. My face was calm because servants learn calmness early. But I remember looking at that small shoe and thinking how carefully the world had prepared a path for her to walk. What stayed with me was not envy alone, but the sadness of caring for a child whose life was opening while mine remained folded into corridors and tasks. I did not want to harm her. I wanted someone to see the distance between us and admit that it had not been made by merit. She had not earned the warm room any more than I had earned the back stairs. We had simply been born on different sides of a door. Below stairs, some servants spoke sharply about children who behaved badly. They were not wrong. A spoiled child could make the day harder than an adult, but even then I saw how early the house trained them. Someone would pick up what they dropped. Someone would answer when they called. Someone would stand while they sat. Childhood itself taught them rank before they could name it. A child's hand in mine on a stair, a sleepy head against my shoulder, a small smile given before manners had fully hardened. These moments could warm me and wound me at once. They made me feel human, then reminded me how little of that humanity changed my position. Class was passed on quietly in nurseries, not by speeches, but by daily arrangements. One child learned to expect care. Another girl like me learned to provide it. One child was prepared for choices. Another was prepared for usefulness. The difference began before either could understand it. I watched those children grow in rooms I kept tidy and learned how early a future can be protected for some and closed. I could care for them honestly, even tenderly, while still feeling the small ache of standing outside the life being made around them. My own rare hours away from the house would soon show me how strange it felt to remember that I was more than a uniform and a pair of useful hands. A day out felt strange before it felt happy. I would wake with the same servant's caution in my body, then remember that for a few hours the bells could not reach me. There was no tray in my hands, no room waiting to be dusted, no child's shoe to tie, no mistress's voice near the door. I had leave to go out, and that permission itself felt almost unreal. I did not have fine clothes for freedom. I had a simple coat, a plain hat, shoes that knew too many stairs, and perhaps a small parcel in my hand. Still, changing out of my working dress made a difference. The uniform had a way of telling the world what I was before I said anything. Without it, I did not become grand, but I became a little less readable. Stepping into the street, I noticed things differently. Shop windows, carts, church bells, women walking with baskets, children near doorways, and men hurrying along with work on their faces. None of it was new, yet it felt wider than the corridors behind me. I could turn my head because I wanted to, not because I was checking for dust or waiting for orders. It says something about service that a short walk under an ordinary sky could feel like a privilege. I did not need a great outing. Sometimes walking without a bell in my ear was enough to make my chest loosen. I could look at a window display, pause near a church, or stand for a moment in the open air without being told I was in the way. If I visited family, the feeling was tender and uneasy at once. Home was familiar, but I no longer belonged to it in the old way. My mother might look older. A younger child might have grown taller. The room might seem smaller than I remembered. I brought news, perhaps a little money, perhaps something small wrapped in paper. Then I sat there knowing the hour to leave was already waiting. Friends, when I met them, carried their own tiredness. We might speak of work, wages, mistresses, food, illness, and whether a place was bearable. We did not always say everything. A day out was too short to spend all of it complaining. But service followed us into conversation anyway. It sat between us like another person at the table. Other people may call a free afternoon simple, but I had to hold mine carefully because it came with a return time stitched into it. That was what kept the happiness from becoming complete. I could walk away from the house, but not too far from my mind. My clothes had to stay neat. My conduct had to stay proper. I had to return on time, not looking careless, not looking too pleased with myself, not giving anyone reason to talk. Sometimes I went to church because it was respectable and because sitting among others without carrying anything felt quiet in a different way. I could lower my head and not be folding cloth or listening for a bell. Even there, I knew class did not vanish. Better clothes sat in better places, but for a little while my hands rested together and no one asked them to move. There was one afternoon I remember on a street near some shops. I stood outside a window looking at ribbons, gloves, and small things I could not properly afford. The glass showed my face faintly over the goods inside. I looked young and tired together. My hand held a small parcel. People passed behind me, and for a moment, I was only another woman looking at things she might want. What made me sad was not that I could not buy much, but that wanting anything for myself had begun to feel like a habit I needed permission to recover from. I had been trained to think first of work, wages, home, references, and duty. Even pleasure had to justify itself. A ribbon was not only a ribbon, it was a coin not saved, a sign someone might notice, a small foolishness I might scold myself for later. The day always seemed to shorten suddenly. Morning seemed generous, then the afternoon began to tighten. I would check the light, the street, and the distance back. My feet, free for a while, remembered the house before I reached it. The closer I came, the more my body returned to service. My steps quickened, my face settled, my thoughts folded themselves away. Reaching the servants' entrance after a day out felt different from arriving the first time. I knew the door now. I knew what waited beyond it. The kitchen heat, the bells, the stairs, the voices, the unfinished tasks, the need to become useful again. A few hours outside had not broken the hold of the house. They had only shown me how strong that hold had become. Those rare days taught me that freedom can feel painful when it is too small. It lets a person remember herself, then asks her to put that self away again before evening. I did not return from leave empty-handed, even if I bought nothing. I returned with the ache of having remembered that I existed outside the work. For a few hours I walked as if my life might be wider than the back stairs, the bells, and the rooms I kept clean. Then the hour came, and I folded that wider feeling back inside myself as carefully as any servant folds linen. The house accepted me again without surprise, but my body would soon begin to show that even obedient hands and careful feet cannot keep working forever. Illness came first, as something small enough to deny, a cough in the early morning, a back that did not loosen after poor sleep, a wrist swollen from water, scrubbing and carrying, feet that hurt before the day had properly started. I learned to notice these things and then work around them, because noticing was allowed, but stopping was not always possible. In service, a sick body was not only a body in pain, it was a problem for the house. If I moved slowly, someone else had to move faster. If I stayed in bed, work shifted badly across the kitchen, the stairs, the bedrooms and the bells. I knew this, and so did everyone around me. Sympathy could appear for a moment, but the work remained larger than sympathy. So I learned to measure illness by whether I could still be useful. A sore throat could be hidden, a cough could be turned away into a sleeve, a headache could be covered under a cap, a backache could be swallowed with a tighter mouth and a slower breath. Only when the body refused completely did rest become difficult to avoid, and even then it did not feel safe. A servant could be pitied for being ill, but only briefly, because pity rarely washed dishes, lit or carried hot water upstairs. That was not always spoken cruelly, it lived inside the day. The house did not become smaller because my chest hurt. The fires did not wait, and neither did breakfast. The family still wanted rooms warm, linen ready, meals served, and bells answered, no matter how tired the girl below stairs had become. My fear was not only of pain. Pain was familiar by then. I feared becoming inconvenient. A young servant was useful because she was quick, strong enough, and cheap enough to replace. If I became slow, too often ill, or too weak for the heavier tasks, I could feel my place loosen under me. There were always younger girls who needed work. I had once been one of them. There were mornings when I sat on the edge of my narrow bed under the roof and listened to my own breathing. The room was bitterly cold. My uniform lay nearby, waiting as if nothing had changed. I might hold my chest after coughing and look at that dress, knowing it had to be put on whether my body wanted it or not. The sight of it could feel harsher than a scolding. Most people think rest begins when a person lies down. But for a maidservant, even lying down could be filled with the fear of being judged useless. I would count how long I had stayed still. I would wonder who had noticed. I would think of the housekeeper's face, the mistress's patience, the work being done badly by someone resentful below. Illness did not free my mind from duty. It made duty heavier. Sometimes another servant would bring a cup of tea or ask quietly how I was. Those small kindnesses mattered. They did not cure anything, but they reminded me that I was not only a failing pair of hands. Still, even kindness had to be quick. No one could sit beside me long. The house pulled everyone back. I remember one evening when my hands were swollen from cold water and rough work. The skin near my knuckles had opened slightly. I hid them under my apron when someone passed, not because I was ashamed of the wounds, but because I feared what they proved. Damaged hands still had to work. Damaged hands that could not work were another matter. What frightened me most was how easily my own body began to feel like something I had borrowed from the house and failed to return in good condition. That feeling did not come from one person alone. It came from years of being measured by readiness. Could I rise? Could I carry? Could I answer? Could I finish? Those questions became more important than whether I hurt. Illness also made the future look thin. A family might keep a long-serving servant for a time if she had proved herself, but kindness depended on money, mood, and convenience. A poor woman could not count on care simply because she had given care. If she became too weak, there were workhouses, relatives who had little space, small savings that disappeared quickly, and charity that could make a person feel smaller while saving her from worse. We did not speak of all this every time someone coughed. We spoke of hot water, rest if possible, a shawl, a little tea, getting through the morning. Poor people often survive by keeping the terrible thought at the edge of the room. But the thought was there. A servant's body was her chance to stay employed, and the work spent that body every day. By the time I understood this, I no longer imagined strength as something grand. Strength was rising when the throat hurt. Strength was carrying a tray with a sore wrist. Strength was smiling faintly when asked whether one was better, because saying no too often could become dangerous. It was not noble. It was necessary. Sickness showed me that the house did not need me whole, only working enough to keep its comfort undisturbed. My bed under the roof could hold my tired body for a few hours, but it could not protect me from the question of whether I was still useful. Age was not far behind that question, and with it came the quieter fear that the house could remember my service and still choose a younger pair of hands. Age did not arrive in one morning. It came in small delays. A button took longer. A tray felt heavier before I reached the top of the stairs. My eyes missed a speck of dust I would once have seen at once. The house did not change because my hands had begun to slow. It only made the slowing more noticeable. For many years I had measured myself by usefulness. Could I rise early? Could I carry without spilling? Could I remember orders? Could I move quietly enough to be forgotten? As I grew older, those same questions returned with a sharper edge. I still knew the work well. I knew the rooms, habits, stairs, and moods of the house, but knowledge did not lift a coal scuttle by itself. A younger maid came into the house one spring, fresh-faced, nervous, and quick in the way I had once been. She made mistakes, of course. New girls always did. She turned the wrong way in passages and held a tray as if it might betray her. Yet I noticed her speed. I noticed how lightly she climbed the stairs. It is a hard thing to serve a house for years and then realize the house may value your replacement before it finishes using you. No one said that to me. Nobody needed to. I could feel it when heavier tasks shifted toward younger hands, sometimes kindly. I could feel it when someone told me to rest, and the kindness carried a small warning inside it. My body had become a record of the house. My hands were thicker at the joints. My back stiffened after kneeling. My eyes were tired in dim corners. My feet knew every stair, but knowing did not keep them from aching. The same work that made me dependable had also spent the strength behind it. I did not want to be pitied. Pity could be dangerous. Too much pity meant people had begun to see the weakness clearly. So I tried to stay useful in quieter ways. I corrected a younger girl before the housekeeper heard. I folded the linen carefully. I remembered where things were kept. I moved more slowly, but I moved with memory. A young servant can be clumsy and still seem promising. An older servant can be careful and still seem worn. That difference hurt more than I expected. The girl passing me on the back stairs with a tray did not mean to wound me. She only stepped aside politely, face serious, arms steady under the weight. I placed my hand on the rail and let her pass. For a moment, I saw myself going by in another body. Younger hands can make the same work look lighter, even when the work itself has not become kinder. That was what unsettled me. The house did not need to become crueler for me to feel myself losing ground. It only had to continue. Fires still needed lighting. Tables still need to be set. Beds still need to be made. Bells still rang. The household kept turning, and no single servant was the heart of it. I remember standing on the back staircase one afternoon, while the younger maid carried a tray upward. The light above her was pale, and the lower stairs behind me smelled faintly of kitchen heat. My hand rested on the banister. I did not move for a few seconds after she passed. No dismissal, no harsh words. Only work is continuing without needing me in the same way. What hurt was not that she was young, but that I could remember being young and still could not return to the strength I had given away piece by piece. I had not wasted myself. I had worked because work was required. I had sent money, kept places, learned rules, survived moods, and carried years through narrow passages. Yet the result looked simple from the outside. An aging servant, slower hands, a place that might soon need filling. Below stairs, older servants were treated with a mixture of respect, impatience, and fear. Respect for what they knew, impatience for what they could no longer do quickly, fear because every younger servant could see her own future in them. Age in service was not only age itself, It was a warning for everyone. Sometimes I wondered whether the family remembered my years there. They remembered me when I was needed. They remembered my reliability, perhaps. But memory in a household often lasted only as long as usefulness. A polished room did not carry the name of the woman who polished it. I had once thought experience might bring security. It did bring some. I was less easily frightened by small corrections. I knew the rhythms of the house. But security in service was never solid. It depended on health, speed, temper, references, and whether someone younger could do it with fewer complaints from the body. By then, I understood that a servant could give a house decades and still not become part of its future. The house wanted quiet continuity. It wanted clean rooms, warm fires, answered bells, and polished silver. If I could provide them, I would stay. If I could not, someone else would carry them. Age made me quieter, not because I had less to say, but because I had begun to hear how easily a lifetime of service could be replaced by quicker footsteps. The back stairs still knew my hand, though knowing a place was never the same as being kept by it. Leaving the house would not feel like rest when the time came, because a life spent serving can make even departure feel like another kind of being dismissed. Leaving the house did not feel like freedom, yet when the time came, I did not feel light. I felt as if something had been loosened from me after being tied there for too many years. The decision had not arrived with ceremony. It came through slower hands, tired eyes, a back that could no longer forgive the stairs, and the quiet understanding that the house needed work done faster than I could now do it. The worst part was how ordinary it became. A servant grew older. Another servant came in. The household adjusted.